Hello, my friends. Welcome back to the channel. I had the recent pleasure of getting to speak with Tariq EQ Amawi on his platform on Facebook. It was a lively discussion. We covered a lot of topics, but my general intention was really trying to speak about natural law, self-ownership, and objective morality. It was a really awesome discussion, so I've decided to go ahead and share it here on the channel. So here is that talk, and I hope you enjoy.
We're live.
We're live. We're alive.
We're alive in living color. And this is great to be able to have this conversation. So for those of you who don't know, this is a dear brother, Logan, of the Wizard Factory. And you're also somebody who just happens to strike a chord with people. You write in a way that gets into people's minds, into people's thinking, and gives voice and articulates a lot of the stuff happening for them internally, which is, I think, why you have such a strong resonance with your posts. And also you're a great writer and very lucid and eloquent in your delivery and articulation. So it's great to be able to have this conversation with you. And I know we're streaming across a couple of different platforms. So for those of you who don't know, my name is Tariq. Hello. Hi. Nice to meet you. Welcome to the show.
Yeah, man. Pleasure to be here. Always great to speak with you, Tariq, and I appreciate that nice introduction. Yeah, I do really try to find that balance with provocative, but not just excessively caustic just for no reason. You know what I mean? Like, I want to shake you up a little bit and make you think, but in a healthy way, and in a respectful way, in a caring way, because ultimately it's all coming from a place of truth and love, you know, which is my foundation.
Yeah, I'm very much similar. I think you and I actually have a very similar resonance or tone that
I
we
agree.
ring through the social media sphere. And someone told me recently that I was very controversial with my posts. And actually, I would argue that the way the world is controversial by default. So, of course, if you're going to say something that rings of common sense, or let's say traditional sanity, it's going to sound controversial in a very out of whack world. But I don't intentionally set out to polarize people. Sometimes I enjoy doing that. I used to enjoy doing it a lot more in the past, to be honest. Now I've just got to call it how it is. I have to say what I see. And if that happens to be controversial or upset a few people, so be it. Because I think if we're too worried about being offended and having our feelings hurt, then how are we going to be able to solve the actual injustice and harm and injury taking place in the world?
Absolutely. I mean, the controversy isn't the goal, it's more a byproduct, like you said, because the more the world turns its back on truth and is living in illusion and delusion, then the truth itself becomes controversial. And, you know, I say it, you know, it will sound like, it will taste like poison, you know, rather than medicine to those who aren't ready for that healing. But you cannot heal without the truth. You also can't hear truth without healing. So I say those two things have to go together. They're like a left foot and a right foot that have to go in tandem, in lockstep, towards, you know, deeper awareness, which is, you know, the kind of really the ultimate spiritual goal, or how I would define spirituality itself. So I also try to hit on those points. You've got to encourage people maybe to look within themselves, to question their own beliefs and their identity. That's a big part of it as well. But then offer other perspectives that maybe they haven't considered, or they've been programmed to believe otherwise, or their own internal shadow and wounding is blinding them to that because they don't want to see that. But that's exactly why they need it. That's why I say, you know, truth is healing. You know, you have to, it is the medicine. But if you're not also healing in the process, then you're going to lash out and reject it when you hear it, and then probably attack the person who said it, often me or you.
Right. So I know what my view is on this, but why do you feel the truth is so confronting? Because there's people like you and I who I would rather just give me the bitter pill. I'd rather know what's actually going on and be appalled by it than live in an ignorance is bliss type universe, which I think in many ways, many of us grew up with this romanticized view of the world until we began our own process of awakening. People think awakening is all love and light and kumbaya. And it's actually much more like a slap in the face, because once you begin to see what's happening behind the scenes, those illusions can't help but fall away, and you can't rely on this perfect picture that you once cast in your mind.
So you're asking why do people reject the truth?
Yeah, why is this concept of having your beliefs confronted so confronting? Like, what about that is confronting, do you think, for people?
Yeah, so a big aspect of my work and what I focus on a lot is mind control and the way it works. So, I mean, if I was to promote one video that I've ever done, it's a 4-hour presentation that I made last summer called Trivium Hacking, Mind Control, and How It Perpetuates the Slave System. And what I set out to be is the master blueprint to understanding what mind control is and how it actually works. And so from that, to answer your question, it's all about identity constructs. So the way mind control works is its currency is trauma. It cannot work without trauma that induces fear. And so everything about the system is some form of a traumatic experience. It subjugates you
Mm.
in some way. It demoralizes you. It gaslights you, oftentimes very subtly, but slowly over time, eroding your sense of self, your construct of the world, and then like through that process is then implanting or installing mind viruses to replace that. And then because trauma disrupts and erodes the sense of self, which is the ego. See, and this is very key because in the spiritual community, the ego gets a really bad rap, right? Because the ego is often a source of problems because people have this unresolved trauma that they're operating from that. But if you had an infection on your hand, you wouldn't say hands are bad. Just even if most
Right.
people in the world had an infected hand and everybody's walking around saying you got to kill the hand, right? No, it's not the
Mm.
hand that's the problem. It's infected, but it's a part of you, and it's got a job. It's a very important part of you. It's a tool, but it needs to be healed and reintegrated, and that's what the ego. That's what shadow work is all about. It's not about
Mm.
killing the ego. That's asinine, but it's also impossible. I mean, ego is what tells you, like, hey, this is wrong. I'm being violated. Like, no means no. These are my boundaries. All of that is coming from your sense of self.
Hmm.
So, again, the trauma disrupts that. And then people have this sort of a knee jerk reaction uh, to compensate for that violation. And so it either causes their boundaries to go way out here, and then they're like sort of the narcissistic control freak archetype or the dominator archetype, or it goes implodes in on them, and it's like, I'm worthless, I deserve this, right? Like, do whatever you want, I'm not going to stop you. The doormat archetype or the victim, you know, sort of.
Or the
It's a dialectic.
self-punishing religious
Yes, exactly.
devotee.
And this often kind of correlates to left and right brain hemisphere imbalances as well. So that's a key part of understanding how this works from the psychological perspective. The left brain is the dominator side, the right brain is the slave side. And if you heal and balance and integrate all of that, you unlock holistic heart-based intelligence. But If not, you're going to be on one side of the or the other, where you're almost kind of identifying with either the person or system, or collective that abused you, or you
Mm-hmm.
become identified with your own victimization. So all
Mm.
that to say, to finally answer the question, is this system itself is anti-human. It is invasive and abusive, and over time, it really messes with people's sense of self, and therefore, there's this really hard time people have with personal accountability, for one thing, admitting you're wrong, saying you made a mistake or you were wrong about a belief that you had, and
Mm-hmm.
also people trauma bond with their beliefs, just in the same way an addict trauma bonds with a drug. It's something that they're trying to seek externally to complete themselves, to feel
Mm-hmm.
whole again. But obviously, it doesn't work. It's killing you. And same with these false beliefs. Um, People become so identified with them as a sense of like, I need this. This gives me purpose, or this answers questions, or gives me this sense of identity as this or that. That when you even question the belief itself, they take it as a personal attack, and they become very hostile about it.
Because they've become the belief, or
Exactly.
they believe the belief to be them.
Right. They're incapable of distinguishing between the two, let alone having any sort of scrutiny or critical thinking applied there. So that is
Yeah.
my long-winded, answer to your question.
I think for myself in that respect, when it comes to beliefs, I see beliefs like outfits, right? Like right now, I'm wearing this particularly floral t shirt, which I can easily take off and swap for a fireman's outfit, or I can put on a lab coat, or I can decide to put on a jacket. And I think rather than see ourselves as a personality, if we begin to see ourselves as a presence, then everything else is malleable, everything else is plastic. And I think there's this, it's probably a knee jerk reaction of the ego, or the self identification of the ego, that believes that your ego or your personality has to show up in one particular way in order for you to survive. Whereas in
Mhm.
reality, everywhere you go, you're still going to be there, right? No matter what happens to you, no matter how much your personality changes, the essence of you, right? Your consciousness, your soul, your spirit, whatever you want to call it, is going to continue to perpetuate. So I think it would behoove us to release this idea of needing to identify with a former version of ourselves, or a particular version of ourselves that subscribes to a particular, or conforms to a particular narrative, and instead allow ourselves to move and change current, just like a river or just like the wind, because no matter how much we change, it's still going to be us, because the presence and the essence is going to remain.
Interesting. I would kind of frame it a different way. Not that I
Mhm.
disagree with you, but the way I look at it
You can
is,
disagree with me, Logan. It's totally fine. I won't.
oh, I will.
My
I will
ego won't
believe.
get too hurt.
No, I'm just my perspective on that is you are who you are, right? And you can't be anything other than who you are. You can only convince yourself you're something that you're not. So
Hmm.
your identity is either who you are or who you aren't, because your identity or your ego is not yourself, it's your sense of self. It is your self concept, right?
Hmm.
So it can be either accurate or inaccurate, just like any form of, I mean, same with beliefs.
Right.
Beliefs apply to the world as well as yourself. It's the inner and outer worlds, right? So this is the kind of this universal principle of, applying your intelligence and being authentic. So, right, like some aspects of your personality really are you, and you're just being authentic, and you're being really who you are, or you're being not who you are because you're wearing this mask to, as we said before, try to compensate for this like wounding and this like incomplete sense of self.
But what if you've practiced being inauthentic for most of your life because you've believed that all of these masks and layers that you're shrouded in to be part of your personality, but in actuality, they are coping mechanisms, defense responses, and reactions to a world that has constantly tried to pigeonhole you and move you into specific boxes and conform you to certain archetypes and stereotypes since you were a kid.
That's why the healing comes in. To heal, the word heal itself comes from the Germanic word heil, which means whole, to be complete, right? So again, the trauma fractures the psyche. That's what, yeah, like yeah, I won't get into all that. But yeah, it fractures the psyche, and that's where like split personalities come from, all or like dissociative disorders. It's all kind of different manifestations of the same thing. So
Mm-hmm.
healing is just holding. You're just becoming complete as a true being, instead of this construct of all these different ideas, like you're saying. So I mean, there's always more layers to uncover, but I mean, ultimately truth discovery is the goal. So you have to both accept that you might be wrong about some things. We all don't have all the answers, and that's fine. That's just part of it. But also you are striving to always be seeking the deeper truth and the truer truth, so to speak.
Yeah. So I like MJ's comment here. Just going to bring it up. It's harder for people to wake up who have been programmed and brainwashed all their life. Yes. And it's hard to admit to yourself that you've allowed yourself to be brainwashed. So it's much
Hmm.
easier to vilify someone who's trying to point that out. And it can be a bitter pill to swallow to go, actually, even me as an intelligent, rational being is not above being programmed or conditioned by external stimuli.
Exactly. There's a quote, I don't know who said it, but it's like it's easier to fool someone than to convince them that they've been fooled. But I think awareness is the first step. Once you understand that there is a mind control agenda and that the system is not there in your best interest, but very
That sounds
much
like
the
some
opposite.
conspiracy talk to me, Logan.
Let's get
I don't
into it, man. Get your full hat ready, man. Yeah,
know.
it's very,
Well, I already had
very,
foil on my head today because, as you can see, I've
got some
gone blonde
highlights.
for a change. Yeah, yeah, it was the highlight of my day.
Nice. So on one hand, it's harder because they're so conditioned, but in other ways, it may be that they're more primed. Like
Mhm.
like the events of the last several years, or say 9/11, even though those were actually trauma-based mind control programs, that were events that happened, they also woke a lot of people up, because it's showing you what's happening. And
Right.
it can go either way, really.
Yeah, I would say that every calamity both reveals the hidden hands and brings more people to the cusp or beyond of awakening, while also taking those who are much more susceptible even
Hmm.
further into their catatonic or comatose state.
Absolutely. Yeah, I mean, it's pretty much red pill, blue pill. That is the ongoing, what is unfolding us in this time that we live in right now, is that we're
Hmm.
moving closer and closer to the ultimatum, to the you know the fork in the road. And it's like, every individual has to choose freedom
Do
or
you think we're
slavery.
still do you think we're still moving towards the fork in the road, or do you think the fork in the road is now behind us? It's in the rear view mirror.
The fork in the road is every day with every single choice that we make.
Hmm.
It's ongoing, right?
So
And
it's
you
not
can
too late.
change it. No, it's never too late. That's the beauty of this place. Your choices are constantly um, joining in contributing to the choir of co-creation of our shared reality. This is so important. This is something that I kind of rail against pretty harshly because for a very good reason. There is no my truth or your truth. There is only the truth. Now I understand when people say that they mean like what's true for to me, but
Hmm.
it's not what's true for you. That's the difference, is that truth is truth. You can have a different perception or experience. Like there's plenty of other words that are perfectly suitable for that concept without saying truth, because when you use truth interchangeably, it cheapens the meaning of what truth really is and the
Well,
importance that truth is supreme to above, beliefs or feelings or perspectives or any of that.
well, I have to interject there slightly because I would go even further than that since we're talking about the origin of words and the etymology and things. Truth is the opinion of what is true. So in a courtroom, you'd have to tell the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth. That means your take on what you believe is true. There's what's true, and then there's truth. So I feel like truth has actually been lessened because it doesn't mean the same thing as true. There's what is true, which is objective reality, and there's truth, which is a subjective lens on that objective reality.
Mm, okay. I think it's a bit of a semantical thing we're getting into where it's just like, what word do you choose to mean what thing? And so for me, that's why I'm specifically clarifying. I mean, that's a different kind of direction.
Yeah,
I'm
yeah, I'm,
more
I'm not trying to
focusing.
catch you out. It was just something that I learned literally like a month ago. So I
Um,
always thought truth meant what is true, but truth is opinion of what is true. And then what is true is the objective fact.
Right. So I wouldn't word it that way, but that doesn't mean I like conceptually we disagree. It's just I'm trying to differentiate the same thing you are, just using different words. There is truth itself, which is objective, and it just is what it is. And then
Hmm.
there's our perception of truth, and there is when it comes to that, there's layers to that as well. Like you could hold up, a pin and say this is an object, and then you could say this is a pin, and that's more true than object because of specificity. Or you could say it's a blue pin, it's in my left hand. You're going deeper towards the truth. um so there's like a relative spectrum to that, but the pin didn't change based on how you describe it. It just is what it is. So
Right.
that's important distinction.
Right. So that is what is true. And then the way that you describe that pen could be your truth or could be a version of the truth.
Or your idea of it, or your perception, or that's why I like to keep truth in its own category, so that it is pure and just is supreme over any of our human constructions that we can put on top of it, which may or may not be. We
Hmm.
That's the other thing too, is kind of a dialectic. Human beings are capable of understanding truth. People say, oh, well, no one has all the answers, or you can't know anything for sure. That's just, or, well, I don't know. Do you know that for sure? Like, even the assertion of that is an assertion of truth. Or if somebody says there's no such thing as truth, really, is that true?
Yeah.
It's
There's no
just
such thing as beliefs.
it's a self-defeating argument.
Right.
So that's all I'm trying to really drive home, is the importance of truth. And then there's another direction that I is kind of getting to the main thing that I wanted to talk about today, which is there's truth that which is just objective, like kind of what is already manifested, right? So you could look in the past and the present, and that has factually occurred, right? That has manifested. The infinite web of possibilities has collapsed into the singularity of this is what is now. But when you look and project into the future, that's where you have to understand what I call natural law. And this is the governing dynamics of reality, which you can kind of understand as a if this then that formula that you just
Okay.
plug in any action with the variables of the situation or the environment, and this will be the determined outcome, right? So it's cause and effect. It's the same thing as karma, actually, because it's about your choices and then the consequences of those choices.
So, what is natural law for somebody hearing those first two words in combination for the very first time?
Yeah. So piece by piece, first you have natural. The word natural comes from nature, which is derived from a Cometian or ancient Egyptian word necher, which is spelled NTR. Their
Hmm.
concept of God and spirituality was all kind of the same thing. It was nature itself, which that doesn't just mean like what you see when you go to the zoo or like to in a garden or whatever. It's not just like that kind of nature. It's what it really means is that which is inherent to the universe, non-man made, right?
Hmm.
It's kind of the construct of reality and how it operates. And so that kind of brings into the law part, because a law is not actually preventative. It's consequential. So this is pointing directly to what I'm saying, right? um let's see, like there's a law against murder, right? That doesn't mean you can't murder someone. It means there are rules in place
Consequences.
that says if that happens, then and that's why I said if this,
If this,
then
then that.
that, right? So the most important application of natural law is morality. And this is the one fundamental thing that is the key to shifting the dynamic that is happening globally right now, from a condition of slavery by and large. And there's relativistic aspects to that, right? Freedom starts in the mind, and you can do a lot to take back your freedom just by living more freely. However, when you look at the system itself, it is all based in coercion. That is a violation of consent and the causation of harm to other beings. And that is
Hmm.
the fundamental basis of natural law. So again, there's no natural laws that says you can't harm other people or violate their consent, but there are consequences. The most obvious of which is you're creating a condition of slavery by your action. So you can literally look at the condition of the world and every society and say, yes, because people give exceptions to, say, the government, well, it's different when they do it, right? It's not theft, it's taxation. See, that's different somehow because we gave it a fancy official term, but in reality, in nature, there is no difference. It's just a euphemism, right?
Hmm.
So because we give exceptions to certain people, we give these like magical special rights to
Hmm.
them
Hall
that
pass.
don't actually exist, right? Like just because I put on a uniform and have a badge, I can't just start driving around and like pulling people over and writing them speeding tickets and stuff like that, right? So that's kind of the idea, is that morality applies unanimously to every person, regardless of what they call it, how they justify it, or what uniform or, outfit they're wearing at the time, or any of that kind of stuff. And because we're doing that, um, it's creating a condition of slavery, essentially.
But are there consequences? Because if you're unaware or you are in acquiescence to that kind of trampling on your rights, then you are going to allow it to happen. Therefore, there will be no consequence. So the consequence being a natural law, I think, is dependent on the individual upholding those boundaries. Do you know what I mean? Because now we start to get into the world of, and it depends where you want this conversation to go, but it's something that I've been learning a lot more about, statutes and acts. And statutes and acts aren't law in the same way that law is law, right? There's legal, there's lawful. And
Hmm.
so these acts and statutes seem to apply to you, but only because you think they do. And
Hmm.
therefore, somebody with a badge and a uniform and a costume essentially can write you a speeding ticket only because there's the intersubjective belief that that's how the realm operates.
Yes, but you're still being victimized, right? Like,
But largely through your own admission.
sure, yeah, that's where personal responsibility comes from. Is freedom is based on two pillars that both must be present. The first is non-aggression. That's what prevents harm or violations to occur. But we live in the real world where people couldn't care less about that. Some people, bad people, are going to do bad things regardless. Um, Therefore, you need the self-defense principle, and that is each person's responsibility to determine what they are and are not going to accept. Right? Plenty of slaves in the Civil War time period believed that they were rightfully slaves. That didn't mean that they weren't actually slaves, though, or that slavery is not abhorrent. But slavery didn't get abolished. It just got refined to a point where it's much more invisible and
Mm.
seems like, we went from like maximum security slavery to free range, you can go out in the field and, eat the bugs and all that kind of stuff type of slavery, you know.
Yeah, I would say, as I feel like I'm diving into these subjects more, it appears to me, and I don't have conclusive corroborated evidence, but this is definitely the kind of picture that's forming, is that the Roman Empire never collapsed. It just got rebranded, went subtle, went underground.
Hmm.
And the same with the Nazi regime,
Hmm.
the same with slavery. It just became
Yes.
more subtle, more ubiquitous, and more.
Efficient.
Yeah, well, because I can't remember if it was Karl Marx or where this particular statement comes from, but that when people believe they're free, they don't revolt. So you have to expend minimal resources in the way of keeping them suppressed because they're suppressing themselves because they don't believe that there's a problem. I mean, if you
Hmm.
think about it, right, you have like choice of one or two political parties, but you can have 18 different kinds of donuts, right? So
Yeah.
that that should tell you everything that you need to know by itself. If you can choose 18 different kinds of donuts, but only blue and red when it comes to political ideologies, and that's when I feel like, okay, we're given an exorbitant amount of options and choices, right? When it comes to trivial or inconsequential things and things of
Hmm.
actual consequence, you're given very little choice. But the perception, if you don't see that, is, oh, I'm free. I can choose red or blue. But there's a whole spectrum of color.
Right. Absolutely. Yeah. And so it's in part looking at it objectively that slavery is wrong, no matter if you euphemize it or the slaves believe that they are rightfully slaves or subjects, or have this moral duty to obey laws just because they're laws, or any of that kind of stuff. But there's still that human individual aspect of, like, we are co-creating it to a certain degree, right?
Right.
But this is why I put all my emphasis on the importance of natural law, because people can't be free if they don't understand freedom. They can't preserve their rights if they can't even define what a right is. A right
Mm.
is simply an action that is not causing harm or violating anyone's consent. So everything is a right. You have the right to do anything that isn't violating someone else's rights. It's a very simple, almost too simple, right? The mind wants to overcomplicate it and find all these loopholes in this and that, but that really is what it comes down to. It's something a child can understand. And yet, look at the world and look at where people make all these exceptions, and they're constantly trying to dominate each other and force their way on somebody else, when really we all deserve to just live how we want to live, as long as it's not hurting anyone.
Right. Yeah, your right to move through this realm ends at the beginning of the encroachment of someone else's right to move through this realm.
100%. And freedom is 100% vital and necessary or essential to being a spiritual being, because spirituality is all about your choices. And so if your choices are being limited through coercion and violence, then your soul is not being able to fully express itself in all of the ways. You could say source wants to express itself and explore the universe through all of these different little individuated human lifetimes, and just
Hmm.
be a carpenter and a skydiver, and just have all these different experiences. But yeah, as long as there's a ruling class and a slave class, for lack of a better word, the subject class, um, humanity is being severely thwarted in our own, like, spiritual and therefore mental and physical growth and evolution, essentially.
I know that there's going to be people who watch this and they're going to hear the term slavery and they're going to feel like we're making light of what that term actually signifies and actually means. Because once upon a time, slavery was very overt, it was very physically violent, physically repressive.
Yeah.
And for those people, the goal here is not to offend anybody. I recognize that there's a whole history. It's more so that there's a far more nuanced, far more subtle, far more invisible form of what you could only term as a form of slavery, which
Mm.
is when you have somebody controlling somebody else's choices, somebody else's input, somebody else's output for the betterment of the few rather than the betterment of the majority. And the rules are set up in opposition to those individuals actualizing and becoming free. And I think it's happening naturally as consciousness raises on this planet. I mean, just look at, for example, Gen Y, Gen Z, and beyond. People are not content having a traditional job, working in that same job their entire life, and then retiring one day at the, ripe age of 65 or 70 and calling it a day. People want to express themselves. People want to build a personal brand. People want to be themselves every day. These concepts were almost unheard of if you just go back one generation. So I think
Mm.
the evolution of consciousness on the planet is naturally in the same way that a sapling can break through concrete because of all of the atmospheres of pressure. That will to unfurl is so strong that it can literally break through solid concrete. I feel like freedom as an inherent divine right is breaking through the cracks of the old crumbling dinosaur of a system that we have.
Mm. Absolutely. I love the way you worded that, because freedom is a natural force. Every
Right.
being on this planet wants to be free, and they will fight back if you try to impair that or harm them.
Unless
It's
they don't know that
instinctual. until they've been programmed and indoctrinated. That's the real thing. So that shows you that's what the whole mind control game is all about, is getting people to accept that system. But I wanted to touch on another point you made, because I love that you brought up, the how it could seem like we're kind of taking away or detracting from the horrors of chattel slavery, which was
Right.
overt, like you said, and by all means that it is abhorrent. But to look at the word itself, slavery, you have to understand its fundamental meaning. People associate the word with the horrors of, the seeing the pictures with people with the back scars, right? Those images of like horrible violence and all of that. And that is a form of slavery. But to understand the word itself, you have to understand the concept of self-ownership. That's really what it comes down to, is you own yourself, your body, your mind, your and your freedom, right? They are yours by birthright. Again, that's what natural means, is not man-made, inherent, natural. And so essentially understanding freedom is anything that is allowing you to express your self ownership, or anything that is trying to, by even through action, right? Like if I order you to like move to another country, or I will harm you and your family, right? I didn't come out and say it, but my actions have constituted a false ownership claim upon you, right?
Mm.
Because I'm presuming that I have the authority to order you to do that, right? As if you were
You
my
think you have
property.
jurisdiction.
Yes, exactly. And that's this word authority is also extremely important, because that's where the belief in government and all other harmful institutions, that's the thing that they is their like own justification for doing what they do, is, well, we have the authority to do that. But see, if you understand self-ownership, you have to understand then that you can't give someone else a right that you don't have yourself, right? If I have a car and I give you the keys because it's my car and said, sure, you can drive my car to the grocery store, I have that right because it's my property. I have the authority to give that right to you. But if I don't have the right to take 40% of your paycheck, then I can't say, well, sure, I don't have the right, but see, a bunch of us on the block here, we got together and we had a meeting and we decided this guy over here can't. He can take your paycheck, but we'll call it taxation, and we'll promise to spend like at least some of it on fixing the road and this and that. It's still theft. It's just you've shuffled stuff around and made it seem like super official, but really it's no different than a carjacking or something like that, right? Just because if I take your wallet and I take all the cash out, but then I'm like, I go and buy you some groceries, does that justify the theft?
Right.
Not
That's a
at
good
all.
good way of putting it. I had a point I wanted to make, and then I got lost in the analogy that you just made. It's interesting hearing you speak, because I'm hearing the word understand often. And
Mm-hmm.
now, as I'm learning the true definition of words,
Yeah,
every single thing that has a double meaning is pinging inside my mind,
I know what you mean.
like the word understand.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, you do not
And
stand under another. Mm-hmm.
right, or stand under whatever it is that's been said. So if you say something and say, "Do you understand?" You're asking if you stand under, and then somebody responds yes. And now, through their own verbal contract, they now stand under what you said, because they're a powerful creative being and have willingly consented to stand under.
Right, right. So you
And it's
overstand.
you overstand, or you understand, or you comprehend, or any other term. But understand is like in a contract, you have the undersigned,
Yeah, or it says,
right?
"Do
Which
you understand?" Do you, yeah, like the Miranda rights? They'll say, "Do you understand these rights that what that you said.
To understand these rights. Exactly.
Right.
So your rights are up here, but would you like to understand these ones instead?
Yep.
And these are some of the tricks and the trips of language that I see people get caught in. And for me, the more that I'm learning, the more it appears to me that these systems that are in place are almost like an aggregate or an egregore of parasitic energy. Sometimes it can leach and siphon in very overt ways, sometimes in more covert ways. But either way, it's leaching and siphoning away from us as a resource, hence human resources, when actually I feel like we aren't resources at all. To call the fact that we even have a department in companies called human resources is evidence to how much our thinking needs to change. Because if we refer to other people as resources, if you look at what we've done with our natural resources, we plunder, we exhaust, we deplete, we overuse. And how many people in their 9 to 5 job feel depleted, exhausted, overused, expendable, right? It's
Hmm.
because we're seen as resources, as an aggregate of energy, as opposed to as individual beings who are assets to be appreciated, to be trained up, I mean, given skills. And I think that language is where a lot of the euphemism starts, but also language and words translate into actions. And so if you have euphemistic words for things, if you have the wrong label for things, like, without diving into it here on this call, but when people refer to the conflict in the Middle East or the war between both sides, I think to myself, wait a minute, but war by definition means two sides of armed combatants. If one side is thousands of kids, then that is not a war in the traditional sense. That has another term, which is now being brought up in the courts. And so we're very quick to label things with euphemism. And I think that euphemism is actually a very dangerous thing because it makes light of the true severity and harshness of the action that the
Yeah.
euphemism is there to cover up,
Soften. Hmm.
soften,
Absolutely.
or obfuscate or obscure.
Yeah. Yeah. Language manipulation and obfuscation is a one of the biggest assets that they use as weapons in the mind control program. Um, let's see. That hence why I was like what you just said is why I think it's important to keep the word truth as truth and not
Mm.
to kind of like because it becomes all blurry when it's my truth and your truth and we have different truths. See how can it be truth if we have two different ones, right?
But okay, so it can be truth, but it can't be true.
But yeah,
Because in a lawful sense, I believe if you were to pick up Black's Law Dictionary and look up truth, it's the opinion of what is true based on someone's subjective stance.
I can see that in a lawful setting because people are accounting like eyewitness, like they weren't lying even if they missaw something, they were being truthful in their account of what happened.
The best of their
but
knowledge. Yeah.
but outside of that context I still see that as a little bit too wishy-washy with just keeping the word truth out of it and just letting truth be true only, you know what I'm saying?
Well, we can let truth be true. I mean, by most people's approximation, it is. Something else, I remembered what I wanted to say before, and before I lost my train of thought. I believe that there's an energetic entanglement that is in existence in this realm, and that the actions that we either condone or vote for or purchase and buy into, quite
Mm,
literally, with money, or what we think is money, is granting a complicity in the actions. So, for example, people say, well, how is, let's say, slavery or a form of subtle or covert slavery so evident? Look at industrial farming. These are billions of sentient beings that are kept in horrendous, torturous circumstances day in, day out for a decade, 2 decades at times, right? Especially in the dairy industry, for example. And then people are buying that whitewashed, saran wrapped, perfectly packaged piece of meat. You are, through your own involvement, saying on an energetic level and on a, let's say, an energetic contractual level, that this is okay. And not only that, I would go further and say that you're also saying it's okay and therefore it can be done to me.
mm,
Because on an energetic level, you're creating a karmic entanglement with that.
mm.
So once we stop enslaving animals, then our ability to see through our own incarceration, be it proverbial, figurative, literal, will become much more self-evident. And it's the voting for and the participation in these inhumane acts that allows inhumane acts to perpetuate.
Yeah, I agree. That what you said reminded me of what I almost forgot as well. Well, you because you were talking about words and like them saying, "Do you understand?" They're enticing you, inviting you to give up your rights. So the control, let's see, the sorcerer class, if you will. This is getting really like esoteric here, but you know the control system is like a pyramid, right? This is, you know, with the all-seeing eye on top, but that's their perversion of that symbol. That's not inherently a negative symbol, by the way. Just want to say that. But you know, government and banking, those are like actually pretty low level or mid-level tiers on the pyramid. When you get to the tippy top, what you have are dark sorcerers. I know this sounds very like Harry Potter, but I mean this in a very real world sense, of what the occult actually is, which is simply, well, I know you know, Tariq, but for those watching, occult means hidden or not
Hidden.
easily seen. So it's under the veil. Occult is simply knowledge of natural law, which we spoke about before, the way the universe operates, and human psychology, the way we operate, which is a kind of an extension of natural law, right? We're under that as well. And that gives them the power differential because we generally as people are completely ignorant of true psychology, true natural law, the way things work, magic, which is, you know, the way of operating within those laws to bring out specific outcomes. That's all. So when I say sorcerer, they're dark magicians that use magic to create this prison world that they see fit for us, who they see as their property, as their livestock, just a human farm, basically. And they understand natural law. They understand karma. So by and large, they're not the ones doing the harm. They get other people to do it. Order followers, right? Bureaucrats, police and military, um, you know, and lawyers and things like that as well. Like you know, with the word trickery, they're manufacturing consent, or they're I know you know about disclosure, or like where they'll show you what they're doing to you in a
Right.
movie or in a speech or something, and because you don't, you know, resist that, they take that as complicit, like consent in a way,
Yeah.
non-verbally. So that's how the whole system is actually set up. So that's actually kind of the silver lining. is the moment we see it for what it is and say no, the lost word of power, no, the whole system just crumbles because they're nothing without us. Is it the dictator with the stupid mustache, or is it the millions of soldiers, with guns doing the genocide when you look back in history, and just as one example?
Right. Well, there's a de jure government, which is one elected by the people, and then there's a de facto government, which is a corporation, essentially. And a lot of people think they're under the governance of a de jure government, whereas in actuality, it's a corporation which has no more authority than McDonald's or KFC. But it has the illusion of, or the outwards appearance of authority, but that authority is granted by consent. And that consent is taken in very subtle, clever ways in verbal contract and in written contract.
You're voting.
And well, okay, so you mentioned voting. You have to register to vote. Now, the act of registration gives away your power because regis comes from the crown. So in order to register to vote, you're subordinating yourself to the crown, which means you can't vote anyway. It's so mind-boggling the first time you start to hear this stuff because it sounds like utter fiction. And the irony is it is.
It is. Yes. And that's
So for
black
those of
magic.
you
It's
for those
pulling
of
the
you who are
veil
watching
of your
right now,
eyes.
are you enjoying this conversation? Because I haven't checked back in to see with everybody who's tuning in live here. Are you enjoying this conversation? What are some of the takeaways or highlights that you've gotten out of this so far? We have ideas of the kind of things that we want to talk around, but the conversation is in a free-flowing form and can expand and evolve in different directions. For me, the knowledge of law, but beyond natural law in the sense of the forces that are at play in the realm, but law in terms of the divine inherent rights as beings born on and of the earth. That to me is law.
But it's the non-man-made version is what you're talking about, right?
Well, no, because the man-made, let's say, encoding of law into written form, I think is more like a translation of the natural laws of the realm. So that's, to me, that is what is law. And then legislation and legalities and all of that, those are just a complex monopoly game that has fooled people into thinking that they are the monopoly pieces rather than they are the player who controls a piece. And that's the big difference. You know how people say, like, I have a body, I am not a body, right? On your journey of awakening, first you self-identify and you go that my body is me, that is my hand, etc., etc. And then what I found through being around a lot of people who've been on a journey of awakening is there starts to become not a dissociation, but a distance, a recognition that there is the self, which is an essence and a being, and then there is the vessel that you're piloting, which you would call your body, and they're not the same thing. So if you hurt your hand, your soul is not injured, it's just your hand that needs mending or needs healing. And so in the same way that we create that natural distance as we begin to understand who we are as an essence, and that this is just an expression in this temporal realm that we call this life, in the same way, I find that contracts and rights that are written are just an expression of the natural governance that exists in this realm, which is that as beings born on and of the earth, we have a right to the abundance that the earth provides. When you think about it, everything that we need without any tampering or doctoring is already here. The air has the perfect level of oxygen for us to breathe. I mean, what are the odds? and that what we breathe out, the trees breathe in, and what they breathe out, we breathe in. I mean, you'd almost say it was divinely arranged. And then all of the phytonutrients and the enzymes and everything we need to break down these foods, and the magnesium and the phosphate and the potassium, and it all exists. And all of the food that we want to eat is bright colored, almost as if it's meant to stand out from the rest of the tree. I mean, the fact that people think that, oh, this is nothing more than a Darwinian theory of evolution at play. First of all, it's a Darwinian theory for a reason. It was never called the Darwinian fact of evolution. For me, is absolutely flabbergasting. It's like, how can you not look at the utter perfection in the way that everything is in a symbiosis, in a symbiotic relationship, in an ever expanding, ever interconnected ecosystem? And
That
so
is nature. That
that is
is what I
nature.
mean when I say that. It's all of it and the interconnectedness of it. I call it the animistic mindset, the
Mm.
recognition of that truth, and that's a whole other big conversation. I'm not trying to open that can of worms, but just remember that idea. Animism is an essential piece of the understanding of our place spiritually in this realm. But yeah,
And you know how before you said, without getting too esoteric, actually, I feel like esoteric people need to become more esoteric in order to come to a place of connection with the divinity and the divine templates that are at play constantly. I mean, in your very DNA, in your genetic makeup, in the encoding of who you are as a being, it's all divine. And actually, we've moved from an esoteric tribe, right? If you were to look at the populace of people as a tribe, we've moved from being an esoteric tribe naturally, which is our inherent state, to become an exoteric tribe, where we define ourselves based on external stimuli and try and judge ourselves based on man-made things, as
mm,
opposed to what's inherent within us. And it's the
right.
same if you could say intrinsic or extrinsic. We've become extrinsic as beings, and people are waking up to that fact because they're not happy. I can't tell you how many people I met when I was in Bali who had a mansion and 2 cars and gave it all up because they realized that all of those external things couldn't fill the gaping internal void that was their sense of purpose and being. And so they forego and forfeit all of this external wealth for a more simple communion with life.
Hmm. Man, so many different directions I could go with
I
all of
know.
that. Um,
Choose your own adventure.
totally. Um, I would say it's also again back to the left brain, right brain thing. The left brain is the exteroceptive aspect, and it's very because it's the masculine and feminine sides of the brain as well. The masculine is the survival brain that's like looking for lions and food, and it's that exteroceptive aspect. The feminine side is what's the spiritual, the connective, the seeing all things as part of the whole, the one system, right? It's the forest and the trees, if that
Right.
makes sense. It's like the putting all the pieces are greater than the sum of their parts, essentially. Um, I I considered going back to the lawful and legal versus natural law thing as well, because I mean it's like if someone wrote a law that the sun will rise tomorrow, you know, it may be lawful because it's in alignment with truth, with the natural law, which I
Mm-hmm.
do agree that is the distinction to make. But what would be the benefit of that? The sun doesn't need permission from a piece of paper to rise tomorrow. So what uh, you could you can just as easily just educate people, or they can educate themselves through direct experience of nature, of reality, of how things operate, um, without having to kind of create some elaborate system that's just what I would call redundant.
But what you've just described is the legal system. It is the
But
layer of paper on top of what is natural and real.
for what end?
Control.
Okay. Well, yeah. So that's what I mean is it's redundant because the laws are already in operation, and the only reason somebody would create such a system is for control. So that's kind of where I'm coming from is we need self-governance and decentralization. Essentially, like, I know you're big into crypto. This is a sign of the times that we are moving as a species towards more decentralization. We're recognizing the benefits of getting away from these monolithic systems that tend to overstep and dominate and do things in their own best interests rather than in service of. So I like to say that we're moving societally towards decentralization of control and
Mm-hmm.
structures. But I think the one thing we should be moving towards the centralization of is a foundation on truth, because
Mm.
truth itself is the one great unifier. All the conflicts that are happening are my truth, your truth. Let's fight about it, right? Because we can't agree. So if we are able to perceive more accurately through our own divine intelligence, that eliminates most of the conflicts that would arise because now we see eye to eye. It's the one, it's the ultimate middle ground, the common ground that we are all kind of ultimately seeking, even though we go against that because again, all of the programs and the wounding and all of that stuff that's messing with us constantly.
When it comes to why write anything down in terms of the law, right? I've been thinking about that as well. How is it that there is this law that is even in place, right? If you go to, for example, Admiralty and the laws that govern trade on the sea, otherwise known as UCC, Uniform Commercial Code, it was put in place because all of these countries with different means of exchange and different customs and traditions all wanted to be able to do business with one another. And that's why the Uniform Commercial Code, Law of the Sea, was created, right? Which is what we consider to be commerce or commercial code of today. But preceding that was more of a natural law that somehow was written into place and that it supersedes and precedes any of the legal constructs that came after. And the big difference between what I'm finding is things in the lawful realm versus things in the legal realm is the legal realm is endlessly complicated. There's like a million different statutes, but law is very simple and is very simple to uphold as well. And so the only reason that you get lawyers to represent you, right? So they're representing you is because you haven't claimed your authority as a living being. So therefore you need something else to become your mouthpiece.
Right.
And so it's all about a return to self-empowerment. And on this subject, I just want to touch on one thing very quickly. When I hear people say things like sovereign citizen, you have to recognize that those two words cancel each other out. You
Yeah.
can't be a sovereign and a citizen because a citizen means essentially a corporate employee of the state, and a sovereign means somebody who has your own self authority and divine right. So to say you're a sovereign citizen, and when I hear other people use those terms in conjunction with one another, it illustrates a lot of the deception that's taken place. And so this is a very branching field of study and conversation, but starting to dissect and getting behind these word spells, I think is so important moving forward because we've only been taught how to read at an elementary level. We think we're reading complex books, but actually, once we start reading lawful documents, there's ways that words are presented and the way that they're written that mean things. And if we don't know what they mean, we sign on the dotted line thinking that we understood what was on the paper, but it actually means something different to what we think we're agreeing to,
Mm,
and hence the consent.
yeah, it's like a whole other language.
It's a whole other language.
But I mean, the grand takeaway that I hope that I can kind of leave the viewers with one thing of what is the point of all of this stuff that I'm talking about. Uh, natural law, spirituality, sovereignty. It all kind of points back to the same thing. Reclaiming your own authority, your self ownership, your ownership of self, and not outsourcing that to anyone, even a perfectly representative government with a constitution and a bill of rights and all of this and that. As soon as you make that someone else's responsibility, you've given your power away. So I think the pinnacle of like the path forward when it comes to our rising into our higher potential as human beings, like we are so much more than what we are now, and we could become that, but there are very you know real obstacles in place right now. But again, as we said, it's all hinging on the house of cards that is manufactured consent. So for the same reason slaves weren't allowed to read books, uh, simply coming into that knowledge of self ownership, sovereignty. I would say understanding the legalese aspect is part of it, because the system does exist and it's a form of self defense in case you find yourself entangled in that realm. But ultimately, it's all just made up bullshit, anyways, right? What matters is you and the universe, you and the creator, and the reality that we're all co-creating. That's what's real. And so understanding those governing dynamics of the cosmos, as well as your own psychology and how those two things interact, the inner, as above so below, as within so without. um, Anyone wanting, by the way, to dive into deeper into the concept of natural law, I think the best place for anyone to start is a book called The Kybalion that outlines 7 fundamental natural laws. I think natural law goes, I mean, it's infinite, right? Anything that you can say is true is part of natural law, because it's only true because natural law makes it so. But these are like the most kind of universal applicable laws to come to understand, and just getting those down really unlocks so much about like who we are, how the universe works. I really encourage people to kind of take that path.
Do you know what those 7 laws are off the top of your head?
Probably. So mentalism is the first one, correspondence, rhythm, polarity, gender, cause and effect, and of course I'm going to forget one. um, Vibration.
Hmm.
Yeah. And it's cool because they all sort of there's Will. um, they all sort of play off of each other, right? Like polarity is in gender, right? Because gender is a polarity, for example. Or uh, correspondence incorporates mentalism, because for example, mentalism says that everything in the universe is mental. That's why nothing exists without us first like imagining it, right? This cup right here was someone's idea first, and then they put it into action. Well, that's correspondence, because as within, then so without. It began
Mm-hmm.
internally in the mind, and then because of action, because you have to have your thoughts, your emotions, and your actions in alignment. That's what the meaning of the Holy Trinity is, by the way. So we're really getting into like the occult stuff here. That is the secret formula for manifesting things. You know what I mean? Or the trivium, for example. knowledge, understanding, and wisdom. It's or input, processing, output. It's a whole world you could get into, and I cover a lot of this on my channel. So if anyone wants to check out the Wizard Factory on YouTube, there's a lot there.
Awesome. Well, Logan, I think this is a great place to round this conversation to a close. And if you're watching us live, maybe just drop in the chat what were some of the biggest takeaways, or if there were any aha moments or epiphanies or insights that you had, or maybe just a new way of conceptualizing an old concept. Would love to hear from you and get these highlights going in the comments, and I can even put them up here on the screen as well if you have something that I think can be a key for other people. And before we wrap up then, while people are dropping their comments below, is there anything else you want to leave the audience with, seeing where we're at right now in the world and the state of things? What's a message that people would benefit from hearing?
I would say the most important thing, again, as we began with, we'll kind of end with, the most important thing is truth itself. You have to not only respect that, but develop a care for discovering truth. Because if you don't, the illusions, whether they're fed to you or you telling yourself that, are always going to win out. So, hold truth to the highest level and seek it relentlessly. That would be the second step. And then integrate it. Otherwise, it's just intellectual masturbation, right? Of just ideation and philosophy. But if you're not using it, it's inert, right? Knowledge is only power when applied in action.
Applied knowledge.
Yes, which is what wisdom is. So that would be my takeaway. My one message to people is hold truth to the highest standard and regard, seek it relentlessly, and integrate it into your own being without care of what other people might think of you or what delusions and false beliefs of your own you have to tear down in order to rebuild with new eyes. It's an ongoing process, and this is the spiritual process in a nutshell. And it goes on, and it's a beautiful thing. It can be messy, it can be painful, but to me, there's just no other. I wouldn't want it any other way.
Yeah, I think you summed that up very eloquently. Ignorance is bliss, and we have to have the desire to be willing to step out of our blissful state in order to deliver ourselves from our own ignorance, because it can be painful and it can be confronting and probably will be. And it's also necessary for us to heal, because it's the lifting of the veil. It's the bringing what was once shrouded in darkness to the light. So you can see all the cockroaches running around. So you can see all the things that were lurking in the corner and in the shadows. That's part of the process of transmutation from a world of density to a world of divinity.
Yeah. One of my own personal quotes is ignorance is temporary bliss until reality kicks you in the teeth. Because it's going to catch up to you at some point. It always does. That's natural law. So
Right.
it's ignorance is unsustainable, but also, moving towards truth is always in your own best interest as well. So to fight that, to resist that, is the definition of insanity to me.
Right. Isn't it also a maxim of law, like ignorance of the law is no excuse? So you can be in a blissful
I've
state of
heard that.
ignorance, but you can't use it as an excuse. So
Right.
therefore, your blissful state is illusory, or your blissful state is not dependable.
It's dangerous. Yeah, because the universe doesn't play favorites. It doesn't make exceptions. Just because you're ignorant of gravity doesn't mean if you step off a cliff, it's going to spare you. And that's exactly what humanity is doing, is stepping off the proverbial cliff.
Yeah.
Or we can learn to fly, to be really cheesy and cliche.
Or we can realize that a lot of people heading towards the cliff edge choose to model their behavior on lemmings. And if you know anything about lemmings, you don't necessarily want to follow them to the edge of the cliff.
Right.
If
Absolutely.
you follow what the lemmings are doing, you'll get what the lemmings are getting.
Right. When life gives you lemmings, don't make lemonade.
When life gives you lemmings, don't follow them.
It's great.
That's a great place to leave it. All right.
Yeah.
Well, thank you. And I'm glad we managed to make this conversation happen. Thank you, everybody else, for giving your time and energy
Mm-hmm.
and tuning in to this conversation. And if you enjoyed it, share it. Let us know in the
Yes.
comments. Otherwise, we could have just had this conversation in private.
Yeah. And come check out my channel, The Wizard Factory, on YouTube, especially the presentation called Trivium Hacking. That is my, kind of magnum opus to date. And, it's a beast. I spent 6 months working on it, and it really will blow some stuff wide open for people. So,
It's a mind cleanse to the brainwash.
yeah, exactly. Good stuff, man. Thank you so much for having me. I really enjoyed this conversation. I hope others got value from this as well. Don't forget to drop a like below. And
Yeah.
much love, brother.
All right. Have a good one. Stay blessed, stay awake, stay aware.